That.
Great, thanks. Welcome everybody to the April 2021 meeting of the Land Use, Zoning, and Economic Development Committee of Manhattan's Community Board 1. I'm Patrick Cannell, chair of the committee. Hopefully to join us in soon is Fern Cunningham, our co-chair. Two items on our agenda tonight. I don't anticipate that we have any resolutions, but we do have two very different but two very substantial updates to one is an update and another is a panel discussion continuing our conversation about the Planning Together legislation from the City Council. But first, here to give us an update on all things PACE and the progress of construction on various aspects of PACE campus. PACE, and obviously important and big part of our community, has a lot of different projects going on. So we're going to start off with Lindsay from PACE, who will introduce her colleagues and take it from there. Lindsay?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us to speak tonight. We're really looking forward to giving you guys an update. So I'm here tonight with Evie Yolas from PACE, who is VP of Facilities and Capital Projects. And she has two colleagues with her in her department, Aisha Moila and Ryan McEnany. I hope I pronounced that right, Ryan. And Ryan is also from facilities, but he's our Director of Energy and Resiliency. We also have Mary Baglivo, Chief Marketing Officer at PACE, and Rachna Shah, Director from Government and Community Relations. Also joining us, if he's not with us already, in a bit external to PACE, but working on some of these projects with us, is Jordan Barr from DBI. So Evie, I will hand it over to you, and I believe Aisha will be sharing her screen with a presentation.
Yes. Thank you, Lindsay. I'll wait for Aisha to share the screen. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to share a lot of work that we've been doing. We're going to talk a little bit about the master plan and what are some of the projects that comprise of this plan. On the next slide, the master plan is, our master plan is more of a framework than a master plan. The multiple pages that sits on everybody's shelves and collect dust. There was a conscious decision to make sure that it could be easily changed as the priorities changes at the university. The first three goals of this master plan was accomplished by the phase one of our project. That was giving identity for Lubian School of Business at One Pace Plaza and the Dyson College at 41 Park Row. And we created a new student center for success at the One Pace Plaza West Side. Another two major elements of our goal is creating a new exterior identity for One Pace Plaza. That's something probably down the line several years in the future. What we're really concentrating now is creating new forms of learning and research spaces at the university. We also outline as a goal for consolidating our downtown campus lease properties. Over the years, we have taken leases, one-floor leases, half-floor leases, and we looked at it comprehensively and want to consolidate them into either owned or larger leased properties. And we have a growing needs for our performing arts that we've been trying to address it for several years. These are unique needs that not easily able to address it, but we taking it under our arms, and hopefully we've been making some progress on that. We are also need to address critical infrastructure, some of the code compliance issues, sprinkler of the building in One Pace Plaza that we outlined. Some of our infrastructure is original to our One Pace Plaza building, and it's at the end of its life cycle, and we definitely want to, as the renovation taking place, to upgrade that. On the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about, this is the phase two of our master plan, the renovation of our One Pace Plaza West, floors 4th, 5th, and 6th floor. This was slated to start renovation last year, but when the pandemic hit, we stopped the renovation and we postponed it to this year. The scope of the work includes a full renovation of these 3 floors. Also includes infrastructure upgrade for these floors, as well as a new mechanical unit on the roof. It will be replacing an old unit. We are reconfiguring the Lubian School of Business, both the administrative and faculty offices, as well as the student spaces, creating an online learning center to develop digital content, and also upgrading and creating new general purpose classrooms. On the next slide, it's showing a floor plan. I realize some of your screen is really small, but this is the floor, the 4th floor, where the administrative and faculty offices are going to be. We also bringing the Small Business Development Center from 161 William Street and giving them a brand new space. The design of the space is similar to the phase 1, really taking advantage of natural light and giving the best views on the west side to more of the students and the faculty. On the reception area to the Lubian School of Business and the main entry is essentially on the right-hand side in the top corner where the elevator core is. Right there, it's just showing it. On the next slide, this is the 5th floor. The 5th floor is the Lubian classroom space. These spaces are specially catered for the Lubian School of Business and developed based on their requirements. The perimeter circulation will be retained, but as you will see it in the rendering, we're taking advantage of some of the natural light to make sure they filter into these spaces. On the next floor, this is the 6th floor plan. This is the general classroom use plan. This is where the online learning classroom is located. There's also some specialized classroom for the film and screen studies. There are 2 screening rooms here, and then some breakout spaces and little meeting spaces for the students. On the next slide, we are showing a rendering of how the reception area may look like. This is on the 4th floor for the Lubian School. By the way, the architect is Canon Design. The next slide is showing a collision space in the 4th floor. The collision space is an informal collaboration space where faculty can bump into students and spark up a conversation. Again, these are the spaces that are located on the west side to take advantage of the best view of the building. On the next slide, we are showing how a 5th floor classroom corridor look like. We retained the existing windows on the building, but wanted to open up the classroom walls to the natural light. As some of you who may have gone to Pace University may remember, those classrooms didn't get any natural light at all. So we want to reverse that and really change that perspective. On the next slide, these are the active learning classroom. We preparing different modalities with movable furniture so it could be easily reconfigured and changed in the future. On the next slide, this is a case study classroom. This is a little higher level finished classroom for the business school. These are tiered classroom spaces. Again, this is with the highest level of technology, and this is for the specification for the business school. On the next slide is just showing a standard classrooms. The 6th floor will have our general use classroom. Again, we installing the highest technology and make them ready to go from impersonal instruction to hybrid or fully online instruction. What we learned during the pandemic is the flexibility that even the technology is going to be critical going forward in the future. On the next slide, these are the specialized screening rooms that we have. We have a growing film and screen study department, and they needed the specialized classroom. We have 2 of these on this floor. And on the next slide is the 6th floor online learning classroom, and there have some facilities adjacent to this space to create digital content, and this space will also be used to train our our faculty. We're on the next slide, we're showing where we are with the construction. The construction manager is Shamit Construction. As I mentioned, the construction was put on hold last summer due to the pandemic, and we resumed the construction this year beginning in March. The construction currently is ongoing. Demolition was already completed on the 4th and 6th floor, and we began demolition on the 5th floor in the beginning of this month, April. The partition framing is underway. We have begun HVAC ductwork installation. The electrical roughing started. The target completion is August of 2021, so we will be ready for the fall semester. And that's the fall semester where we're hoping to open in-person classes and welcome our students back. We are monitoring some potential disturbances, but the majority, usually the construction demolition is the one that's really noisy. But I know in the past I've received complaints about noise in the roof, so we are discussing that with our construction manager to make sure we mitigate that. And there will be a plan for a street closure. We don't know for how long, perhaps one day, and we don't know which street yet because we have to bring a crane on site to lift the mechanical equipment in the roof. We are updating our website with weekly schedules and construction photographs, so you are welcome to visit our site and get the latest update. And then next, I want to talk briefly about 15 Beekman development. As you know, the building is being constructed by the developer SL Green. Pace University will be a tenant of the building. And we're going to have a 30-year lease on the building, so we'll be occupying it for the long term. SL Green is constructing the core and shell of the building and also undertaking the dormitory floor fit out. So the whole envelope of the building will be their responsibility. The mechanical floors, the elevator cores, the stair elements, it's their responsibility. Pace will be responsible to the fit out of the academic floors. The academic floors is in the lower portion of the building, from the ground floor to the 11th floor. And then there is a mechanical level that's separating the academic floor to the residential floors. The building will serve to replace the outdated student housing currently located in Maria's Tower with modern facilities. The building would also be home for the Seidenberg School. It will has also classrooms, study spaces, the library, our cafeteria, and student academic support. Is being constructed to high energy efficiency standards to align with PACE's sustainability goal. We are going above and beyond their current energy requirements to make sure that we set ourselves up to our goal to be net zero, and Ryan could speak a little about that later. The academic portion of the building is in a design development phase. We will be happy to come back once the plan is set and we have some rendering so we could show you what to be expected. The target schedule of completion there's a typo there. It's the fall of 2023, not 13. And as we are still moving ahead according to schedule. The stacking diagram and the building envelope on the left side, you see how the building mass going to look like. There is a setback on the 6th floor of the building where there is a usable terrace space, and then the building envelope gets shrunk a little and it continues upward. On the lower floor, that's a mechanical level. We'll have some back of the house dining support. We have a coffee shop on the 1st floor with some lounge spaces. And then there is an interconnecting staircase that take you up to the 2nd floor where most of our dining area will be. Then going up to the 3rd floor, there will be some back of house library staff area with a multi-purpose room. And then the 4th and 5th floor is the library floors. On the 6th floor, where the open terraces, there will be also some food service area there. And then above that on the 7th floor is the learning center. And then we have some general use classrooms on the 8th floor. And the 9th, 10th, and even 11th floor are dedicated to the Seidenberg School, both faculty and administrative offices and their academic spaces. And then the 12th floor is the mechanical floor that separates it from the residential area. On the next slide, I want to speak just really briefly about 161 William Street. Once Seidenberg moves out, this will be the home for the College of Health Profession and the School of Education. And we also consolidating our one-stop shop for student services in this building. The building will be fully occupied by Pace University by the end of this year. There's a tenant that moved out from the 7th and 8th floor, and the 9th floor will be vacated later this year. The landlord will be doing upgrades to the facade on 2 floors, the 1st floor and the 2nd floor, mostly on William Street and just as you turn a corner on N Street. They will begin in mid-May of 2021 of this year, and the target completion will be ready for the spring semester of 2022. And the temporary entrance will be on N Street while the renovation is ongoing. The lobby would also get renovated at the same time. This is the artist's rendering on that. The renovation of the lobby coincides with the facade renovation and follows the same completion schedule. On the next slide, our future plans. So we have an urgent need to address the performing arts needs. They need theater performance spaces, they need rehearsal spaces, and all the supporting spaces that goes with it. In the past several years, we've been handling it as an ad hoc, and they reached a point when they really want to increase the size. There's a demand for it, for the program, but we don't have the facilities. As part of our comprehensive look of the program, we looking to lease about 70,000 square foot of area in the close nearby location. We are looking at 3 different locations, all 3 of them about 15 minutes walking distance. And it needs to be close to our space because the student needs to get from one location, one class to the other within the 15-minute in between class time. We know that we will have to renovate that area once we get it. I mean, luckily, in the past, these spaces were not available. Luckily, the pandemic opened up some availabilities that otherwise wouldn't be open to us. So we are looking at that carefully. We are various stages with negotiation with these landlords, and we will be discussing it also with our board of trustees and to see how we may proceed. So we probably see some decision on that fairly soon, one way or another. And then One Pace Plaza East future development strategy. As I mentioned, we have some critical deferred maintenance need, infrastructure needs, code compliance needs. The building is really inefficient. And we have priced it out. It would be really, really expensive to invest all that capital into an aging building and still be left with some of the curtain wall, it's leaking. We have a lot of issues in the building. We also know that we have air rights in One Pace Plaza much more than we ever need, and we definitely want to benefit from the air rights proceeds. So we have hired Newmark to help us figure out how we may market those air rights. We know that at the minimum, we will have to build back a large theater, not only for our performing arts, but also for all university events. And we would like to continue inviting the public into our spaces for various different events as well. So there's a lot of conversation going on. Obviously, the pandemic has put a hold on everything. We are not on a rush on that, so we will be going back and discussing it at a later time with Newmark to see how we may proceed on that. We are also developing a climate action plan where we want to take our campus, not only the New York City campus, but also all of our campuses into a net zero campus. And we also making some headways with the New York City Carbon Challenge commitment. So I think I kept to the 20 minutes allowed for me, and that concludes my presentation. And I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you so much. That's a very good and comprehensive update. So we'll go around and see if folks from the committee have questions, and then folks from the public. If you would use the raise hand feature, and then I'll call on folks. Joe Lerner is first. Pace alum Joe Lerner, then Michael Kramer, then Paul Goldstein. Joe?
Yeah, in the past, Pace University always had the capital before they built. Do you have the capital to do what you want to do?
We do have a capital to do what we want to do. When we build back our One Pace Plaza, depending on what we're building back, we will probably need the air rights proceeds. But again, we don't know what we're building back, so I can't really speak to that.
So as I get it, you have enough in your treasury now, plus the air rights should do it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. That's a good question, because I think that's actually an update from the presentation that we last had. I think at the last time we heard, Vanessa mentioned that the future plans were the subject of future capital planning and maybe capital campaigns. So Thanks, Joe, for picking that up.
Right.
And when I said we have it, we have a strategy of how to make that happen. It's not sitting in our bank right now.
Understood.
Yeah.
All right, Michael Kramer, Paul Goldstein, and then Jason Friedman, please.
Okay, I was wondering whether you're in your quest for additional space, whether you have any negotiations with the Howard Hughes Company to take any space in the seaport.
I can't speak to the specifics of who we're negotiating because I don't want to hurt our chances with either of the landlord. So I'm not going to answer that
So
question.
do you anticipate any activities in the South Street Seaport?
I'm not going to answer that question. I'm sorry. I'm not going to name anybody who we're negotiating with at this point.
Thank you.
Paul?
Yes, thank you. So if you do have air rights, they could be used anywhere in the sites that you control on your campus in that general vicinity?
When the air rights is very difficult to transfer any air rights other than the building. We explored it, we had someone looking at it, and it's very difficult to transfer it. We cannot transfer it to 41 Park Row or any other building that we own. And we don't have a lot of neighbors, and Gary's site already, I think, maximize their air rights. So no, it could be only unlocked if we build it on the site itself.
Okay, and I think in the past you've given some indications that it's possible that through all these transactions, a large tower could be built on the site that currently houses the theater in the vicinity of Gold and Spruce. So that is still being explored. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. That is accurate.
And any idea what the size of the structure might be at the end of that process?
We don't know because we don't know what possible heights, how it will be developed, what are the potential developer might like to do, and we don't know at this point how much of that space we will be needing. So in the next few months, we will be discussing it with Newmark.
And just one last question on that general subject is, what type of approvals from any city agencies would be required for that to take place, that transaction?
Right. So we have the air rights, and these developments is by right to the site, but any new building will have to go through any kind of building department and any kind of city approval.
Right, building department, I know, but anything beyond that, do you need like any kind of city planning approval or anything else?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. But again, that will depend on what gets built on the site.
Got it. And just, sorry, last question. The time frame for making a decision, you said you're talking to Newmark. I guess is this months, years? Do you have any ideas?
So we will be vacating the building with the new building and 15 Beekman and the additional floors that we have acquired at 161 William Street. We will be vacating the east side of that building with the exception of the theater by the end of 2023, the year end of 2023. So at the earliest, that would be the timeline.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Paul. Jason Friedman and Vicki Cameron, please.
Hi, I don't know if I missed this, but I was wondering if you might share later as you get more development with Newmark or, after that, an idea of how much floor area you do have that's underbuilt on your sites. Mostly, I guess that one that you're saying is not an efficient building for you. Because I think one of the things that people were not so psyched about was kind of not knowing about that development on the corner of Beekman and I don't know if it's William. And I think if everybody had known that there was this type of floor area available, everyone would have probably assumed that some sort of development was in the pipeline. Is that something you'd be willing to share with us on your development rights on these sites that you own as part of your master plan?
We could come back at some point when we have some idea from, but we have close to 800,000 square feet of development rights on One Pace Plaza.
And what's the sense of what kind of site is already built? If you have 800,000 there, is it existing 100,000 or, just roughly giving a sense of what could be built?
It could be built if we take down the east side of One Pace Plaza. It could have 800,000 square feet of building built there.
I guess I'm
It's
asking specifically what is built there right now. So let's call it 100,000 if it is. And then I understand you could build 800,000. So the delta there is 700,000.
Yeah, so we could come back with some data when we get some more indication from Newmark. Sure, but it's substantial. It's a substantial air right development rights. Hello?
Okay. Vicky and then Fern Cunningham, please.
Thank you, Patrick. Is it EB?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
So
you.
I just wanted to ask sort of a long-term overall planning question regarding One Pace Plaza. I'm going to start by saying that is your most notable and noticeable piece of land that you have in terms of announcing your existence in Manhattan. Like every university of stature starts with, Harvard Yard, and obviously Columbia has a magical center public space. I was wondering what your plans are by, in overall strategy for a campus center. There is no campus if you don't have a campus center. And I was wondering, now that you're doing mostly these infills and spreading throughout Lower Manhattan, if you give up One Pace Plaza for, any number of reasons, I wanted to ask you to address this issue of losing an unbelievable real estate opportunity that will benefit the university, put a mark for itself on any map, and therefore compete with any number of universities in the world.
So we do hold One Pace Plaza dear in our heart as the center of our university.
Yes.
So One Pace Plaza West, we have made considerable capital investment to upgrade the facilities, and that will not go away. And we keep continuously upgrading it, even the front plaza on the side. We also hold and think that the courtyard is a very important element that sits between the west side of the building and the east side of the building, and we will not want to give that portion up. In addition, we feel it's extremely important to develop a public space, whether it's the theater, auditorium, that opens from the courtyard or to the courtyard, that announces our presence within that footprint. What goes above it and how it will be developed, we will be looking at really closely, but we do understand what a wonderful footprint and how big this footprint is and we do not want to just move away from that. It also connects especially the courtyard connects. We're looking at it as an avenue that connects all the other facilities that we are renting in 161 William Street, 140 William Street, and then connects directly, a visual connection from the front plaza is 41 Park Row, and from the student center that we constructed in phase 1, this new 15 Beekman will have a visual connection also. So we do understand the importance to have this nucleus at One Pace Plaza, and we're not gonna be easily give that up because we know the value of that. But in what shape the development takes place, again, that's a lot of conversation going on, and at this point we don't know that, but we know that we want to hold on to those features of the site.
Thank you. It like you said, the word is nucleus, and for all of us who went to universities that have great centers and campuses, you know, one of the indelible memories is being in there, sort of arriving, and then typically these great schools graduate you in their yards and in these, you know, special places. And it would, and that's what, like I said, not only does that leave an indelible experience for the rest of your life, and that's what I think great schools should do, and their primary interest, I would strongly urge you to remember this and not to, you know, like an amoeba, infiltrate in Lower Manhattan and be everywhere. And it's already incredibly crowded here. And for you to give up this unbelievable opportunity to put a mark, a nucleus, to use your words, I think it will be an opportunity missed literally for the rest of this university's life until you just like ship out to Connecticut or something and get, you know, 1 million acres. It would make also a great contribution to our neighborhood if you were cognizant of this, because squeezing that enormous building on the corner of two narrow streets on Beekman and Nassau is an affront. And, you know, it wasn't done with any kind of announcement. It just sort of started. And I'm sorry that happened. But so now I've been wanting to speak to Pace about this nucleus. So thank you very much. Please keep it, please develop it, please use it. It will be invaluable over the next, you know, 8 million years that you're here.
Thank
We
you.
will get money. You'll get money some way, but don't give up the real estate, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Fern, and then Tammy, and then I see Alice has her hand up too.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Evie. Thanks for taking my question. Mine is probably a little more personal since I live right across the street from the current site. As Vicki mentioned, we had no idea what was coming. And so you said that there's 2 more years of construction that we have to go through before this site at 15 Beekman is completed. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. What would be helpful, and I think would be to be a little more transparent about exactly what's going to be done, what's going on. I mean, because we have been, you know, quite inconvenienced by the deconstruction of 15 Beekman. I'll be perfectly honest. And we had no idea it was coming. It was, so I guess what I'm asking for is there a plan to communicate with the surrounding neighbors, because people actually live here, and it is extremely inconvenient what has been happening in terms of the noise, the dirt, the traffic. People are concerned about asbestos. They have small children. So there's just a lot of communication that could be done with the existing community. But, you know, I appreciate you being here today, but I'm wondering, is there a plan to do more of this, more outreach, more communications about what your plans are in terms of the construction?
Right. We could certainly pass on their comments to SL Green and ask for more communication. And when we do our portion of the work, the academic sector construction, we will certainly make the same arrangement where, as we've done it in the past for any construction that we've done, and we'll post it for the construction and be happy to give updates to the community board. But we will pass along your comments to the SL Green team and see how they could make a communication better and the updates more timely.
Great, thank you.
If I could just jump in. Hi, this is Rachna. My title is actually changing. I was Director of Government Community Affairs. I'm transitioning to be Director of Federal and State Affairs. But I wanted to just speak on behalf of PACE's Office of Government and Community Relations. We've enjoyed a very close relationship, I believe, with CB1, and especially during construction times, we try to make every effort to share updates, to post updates on our website, but we will be very conscious, as EB said, of making sure that you're aware. Some of that is, as EB also mentioned, is under the control of SL Green. It is their building. They are managing and developing that building. So we will certainly communicate with them and try to keep you as updated as possible. But I know that we've always had, Pace University has always had a very proactive approach to wanting to keep Community Board 1 and our neighbors updated because we know that notice is important. And so we will do everything we can to continue that.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's really, whatever you can do with SL Green, including telling them when they do this building, consider that they're on two very narrow streets and adding bulk garbage along. We're going to be awash and garbage. So it would be interesting to know from them what their plans are for the garbage that they plan to, that will obviously come out of this building, because we're on a very narrow street, two narrow streets. So.
And as our plan finalized and we could show how the layout's going to look like, we could touch on those issues as well, so we could update you on what we've been thinking. And the garbage removal, we know that's an issue with the street. We're aware of that. So we will be coming back and update you on that.
Thanks.
All right, Tammy, and then Alice.
Hi, I have a couple questions. Thank you so much for your time. I would like to ensure that the next time you do come back, you bring SL Green with you. EB, would you mind, is there any part of the building that's being built that'll be occupied by SL Green, or is it all used for PACE?
It's all used for PACE.
So you can understand from my perspective as chair, if it is all used for PACE, then the buck stops with you, not with SL Green. You are, as Rachna mentioned, our partner in Lower Manhattan. Even if they are the person who owns the building, it is all being done for you. So I would expect that the next time, I humbly and appreciate and request that you bring them with you, because it is not enough to hand information to them. They need to also be accountable to the community if they are doing the construction, even if it's at your behest, because it is a partnership. It's kind of like husband and wife between the two of you, no offense intended.
Yeah.
So, we want solid communication. Posting on your website does not, I wouldn't expect the 70,000 people who live and work within the immediate vicinity to be checking the PACE website for construction. So pushing out of information to connect to us, to let us know what's going on so we can share it with the community is going to be really, really important. We'd like this to be as uneventful as possible, which is not a word that's ever used with construction. But we would really like to make sure when there are quality of life issues that we have a direct contact. So if that is with SL Green, fantastic. If that is you, fantastic. But it is something that we need to make sure that there are several forms of direct contact. For example, there's one for the day-to-day construction, if there are issues. In an ideal world, there would not be. And then the long-term project issues. Right, and obviously, due to the narrow streetscape, we would hope that you could find in a parking garage parking and that the streets will not be used for private car parking for construction workers because we just don't have streetscape available. So that's my comment and concerns about the construction sites and the project. I have two other things I'd like to ask about. One, in terms of performance arts, what kind of a relationship and agreement, if any, or is there a plan for one with the brand new Performing Arts Center at the World Trade Center campus, which is 6 blocks away?
We don't have any relationship. Our president is friendly with the organization. We know what they're building. We are aware of that. There is no use for us to use their space. We have explored that venue, so as we explored all other institutions of how we could share spaces. So we're not going to be able to use their space.
Did you say it was investigated or it was not investigated?
It was investigated, yes.
And there is no possibility to utilize any of that space for PACE?
No.
I'd certainly, before Rashana leaves to be more larger politics and government affairs on one level up, would certainly like to hear a little bit more about that. So certainly love to have a call on that.
I'm gonna just jump in for a moment, if I might, Tammy. Hi, it's Mary.
Sure.
I know that you've been in touch with our group over the years, and we and you know that our plans for actually expanding our group. So we and look forward to communicating with you or whatever direct contacts make sense within the organization on a much more regular basis. What we're doing with our group that used to be called Government and Community Relations is turning it into an Office of Public Affairs that is part of my responsibility set. And what we're trying to do is actually dedicate more focused attention at each level of our community and government relations. So we will have a full-time person dedicated to our community relationships and government relationships within New York City. And then someone dedicated to our relationships in Westchester, where we have 2 campuses, as you know, the law school and Pleasantville. And then Rachna will be continuing. Of course, she's not going to go away. She'll be involved, but is going to, use her expertise in federal and state. So we're just actually adding more focus on each of our communities. And I think it would be, you answered already the question I was going to ask, which is the best way to help, and we'll take it on, facilitate more thorough and earlier communication with the community and neighbors, so that in addition to having updates available on our public website, that we can actually push forward information. And if we can facilitate a really good flow of information and communication to the neighbors via CB1, that will be outstanding. So I think we have, and we look forward to, a deeper and more frequent set of conversations as we make these shifts. So I think the timing is a good one.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We would like to be in addition to your neighborhood outreach, not the sole purveyor of it. If you need help getting in touch with the buildings in the local area, we're happy to try and help facilitate that. But we don't want to be your only. We'd like to be a portion of.
Yes, got it. Understood. Makes sense.
And thank you. And then lastly, I had a question. When you're talking about 750,000 square feet of development, I just want to be very crystal. That does not include the public space that sits in front of your building, correct?
What public space you're talking about?
The space from the very front steps of Pace to the curb that is considered a pop.
No, it does not include, and it does not include the West Building either. This
Okay.
is we're talking about on the east side of the building.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I appreciate your coming, and we look forward to having a more regular visit from everybody. And Rachna, congrats.
Thanks, Tammy. Alice, you're next.
Thanks, Patrick, and thank you, Team Pace. This is all a little new to me, so forgive some naive questions, but I think the community could be well served for hearing a little bit more about what kinds of community space, if any, are being added in the master plan for the community. I remember vaguely that there is some new space in the new building at Nassau Street that's for the community. Are there other, I mean, could you just refresh our memories as to what those are, and are there additional outdoor spaces? And then with that question, I'm very curious as to any relationship you have with the park across, with anything that's going on under the Brooklyn Bridge. I assume you're aware that this community board is supportive of getting the Brooklyn Banks Park back. And I'm just, given your proximity to that and the richness of that space, are you involved at all with that particular public space and trying to initiate some more, activity there in support of it?
At the present time, we are not involved, and I'm not aware of any activity on that. We also looked at that site as a potential for upgrades and working with the city, since the city owned it, and hoping that with maybe a new development, that could be something that a city would like to take into consideration. So we are not aware of any activities that's going on that site. And the other question about the community use spaces, well, we do have the Bianco room that will be an auditorium space and usable space. I think we have host different community events in the existing location, so that will continue in the new space. Obviously, the theater spaces that we were building, one of the theater space that included in that 70,000 square foot space is a potential 250 person theater. When there's performances, the public can be invited to that. Same for a smaller theater, a 99 seat theater spaces. And when we build the development at One Pace Plaza, obviously the large performance space and community space and the auditorium space that will be built back, that will be usable for the public for different events. Like we have in Nashimo now, there's different events that the public is able to enjoy. We want to keep that feature of the new development as well.
Is there any additional open public space on the ground floor anywhere in the sort of Pace's master plan that's being developed or considered?
We do not have any new open public spaces.
Well,
as part of development, as part of any new development, there are certain guidelines that you have to follow. So once we know what the development is, we will certainly look at those.
Well, that's good to hear. I would just say that it's an extraordinary opportunity to work with the community and Community Board One on, this desire to get what's under the Brooklyn Bridge fixed and active. And so I'm really hopeful personally, and Vice Chair with Tammy, we've been talking about this for a while, and members that have been very strong on that, like Rosa Chang, Paul Goldstein. So I'm really hopeful that as we go forward, this is something that would very much be on the radar. And additionally, when you come back, and I hope it is very soon, because I really think that, I knew nothing about 800,000 square feet of air rights. That's a kind of a staggering number, and how that's all being ironed out and where that is, and questions about what this building is. I know that, there was a discussion at some point about it having environmental and efficiency standards, what that really means, fleshing all that out. And lastly, if you could come on the next time, and I hope it again is soon, with an actual master plan, the physical plan, so we can see, because many of us don't know the neighborhood that well, particularly community members that aren't necessarily from this area, so that you can actually identify each lot, where what we're talking about, where these streets are, the scale of them, the scale of what 1,000, whatever the scale of what this building could be over the theater. These are all the things that I think would be really critical and very helpful to the community to actually physically see. So if you could come back with physical plans, axometrics that show where these things are, I think that would be really great. And I appreciate the time, and thank you. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you. And we
Great,
would
thanks,
love
Alice.
to learn, about what are some of the work that's being done already regarding the park under the Brooklyn Bridge.
I'm sure we'll be happy to provide that for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no doubt. Reclaim the banks. So we have Colin and another hand up as well from members of the public. I just want to be mindful of our time. We're almost at about an hour with this topic, and we have another substantial discussion behind us. So with that in mind, Colin, you are next.
I showed up late, so I apologize if you've already covered this, but obviously this will have a catastrophic impact on the climate, and I'm wondering what you're doing to offset that carbon impact. Are you considering carbon negative buildings, or at very least LEED gold buildings? Would love to hear about that.
Again, we'll come back with those plans. We don't know what's getting built back, and then will be all taken into consideration. But our goal is to be carbon neutral. We want to make some really aggressive headways to reach that goal.
Yeah, I think you really have an opportunity to make headway. I'm not sure if headway is the right word. I think you should think way outside the box and address what's a very, very serious problem. 800,000 square feet of airspace alone, again, will have a catastrophic impact on our climate. And you can't just put a silver platter on the side of your building and say, we're carbon neutral. I think you have to think outside the box, and you won't get my vote unless you actually consider doing exactly that. Thanks.
Colin, I'm sorry, it's Vicki Cameron. Sorry, may I just ask, but this building that you are currently building at Nassau and Beekman is a very large project. So it's already designed and approved. So all of these questions, you should have answers to.
Well, I'm thinking more in lines with the existing campus and that behemoth project that they're eventually going to build there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But even now, whatever they're doing, especially with the one on Beekman and Ann or NASA, whatever, all the documents are submitted. So there's there are those answers that you just asked. I mean, it's a fairly large introduction into an already tight spot, like I keep saying, two narrow streets with an enormous impact, foot traffic and everything else. So do you have any answers for us on the building that your architect designed for you along with SL Green?
Yeah, Vicky, this is Ryan, and I can speak on the sustainability of the building.
Okay, thank you.
At 15 Beekman. So we have had a preliminary energy model done, and that will be in compliance not just with local law 97 carbon emissions that will be released in 2024, but also the carbon emission limits in 2030. Beyond that, the law has not written what future carbon emission limits will be beyond that. So it's hard to compare that. But we are increasing the insulation. We're installing heat pumps as a strategy to utilize future green energy through electricity, LED lighting and controls. And also we're installing dehydrators that will reduce the amount of trash by dehydrating the food waste. And we have received some recognition for our university's sustainability initiatives. The U.S. Department of Energy highlighted us for our response to the pandemic and how we reduced energy use through our energy conservation program. And also, Princeton Review has highlighted us as a green school for the first time last year.
That's my last thought, Patrick, and I'll mute, but that's great for 2007. I mean, we're seeing so many new projects down here, whether it's you guys or whether it's, I'm starting to get angry now, whether it's William Street or whether it's Governor's Island or whether it's this or that. And we're just not doing anything. We're not changing our behavior. We're not doing anything that's positive for the environment. And this is real deal stuff, right? This is not polar bears and ice and tree hugging. This is sustainability of our climate and the habitability of the planet. And I'm tired of hearing that we're adhering to the law. I want you guys to go beyond the law. I want you to think outside the box. I want you to be a trendsetter, not doing just enough to adhere to 997 or just enough to get a LEED certified plaque on the side of your building. Think outside the box. Thanks.
All right, let's move on to Mark Donenfeld, who's a member of the public. Mark, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thanks for allowing me to ask a question, Patrick. I have actually several questions, if possible, to the Pace University group in Mass. Don't you think it would be beneficial to the neighborhood to really manifest your respect for the neighborhood in CB1 and have an open meeting with SL Green, yourselves, your construction people, and allow us to share our contact information so that we can have a dialogue back and forth when issues come up? Because presently, our only avenues of dialogue are with 311, which we call on a daily basis. So far, the folks who have been doing the demolition have broken rules repeatedly. We have spoken to the community board and the district manager has been as efficient as he could possibly be, but there are certain avenues that we cannot try because we do not have any contact information. And if you continue to behave in this manner, I think you're going to create an even more contentious relationship, not only with the community, but possibly with CB1 as well. That's
Mark,
number
I think
one.
that's a great idea. That's something that I would note other developers have done with regard to other projects, big and small. It's not a huge ask, and it's something that I would imagine Pace would be happy to commit to, but they're here and can tell us.
We appreciate the suggestion, and I think that we will follow up with you on that. And we, of course, are talking to SL Green all the time, and we're unable to attend tonight. But we will come back to you with ideas for improving the communication and the establishment of a better mechanism for input and sharing. It may be a meeting like you suggest, Mr. Donenfeld, or other things, but we will get back to you with a response to your suggestion.
Terrific. I hope that the response could be in a timely fashion, because so far the community has not really been informed in that manner. And it would be lovely to sort of reset and start again and move forward with mutual trust and respect.
And Mark, we'll work as well with our quality of life committee folks who have a lot of experience specifically on these kinds of construction issues and how they impact neighbors, and have a really good roadmap of how to make those conversations as productive as possible. We'll do that for you too.
Terrific. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Allison, Friend, I think your hands are up from before. So with that, hearing no other questions and being just a bit over an hour on the presentation, I want to thank the folks from PACE for joining us, Lindsay and everybody for coming out and giving us an update. We look forward to speaking to you sooner rather than later when we can get a little bit more information, particularly on the things that we talked about tonight. So with that, we're going to move on to the second item on our agenda. Folks remember Intro 2186, Speaker Johnson's bill for the Planning Together NYC program, which is a local law to amend the charter to require comprehensive long-term planning. It's something we've heard from the council's folks about recently. We had another discussion about it last month, and we thought it would be a good idea to put together a panel of people who have different perspectives and are informed on the issues. So we're pleased to welcome George Janes, who is with George Janes and Associates, Chris Walters, who's the Land Use Policy Coordinator for the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, and Lynn Ellsworth, who's with New Yorkers for a Human Scale City. So Diana, maybe you could sort of moderate, if you want, who goes first and in what order. I know you were so helpful in putting this panel together and being responsive to the members who had this idea, including Alice and Tammy. So I'll kick it over to you.
Sure, sounds good. I'm naturally going to go in the order of the agenda, which starts with George Janes, and generally speaking, this is a pretty open-ended format, and it's designed to be that way. But let's go through introductions. Each person can take about 5 minutes to talk a little bit about their background and their general position or thoughts on this proposal. And then after that, I figured we can go into a kind of conversational Q&A with questions from the committee members or questions from the public, and I hope there's interested public. And I really want to get to what the committee members are curious about and hear from these folks on their expertise. So George, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Sure, great. Happy to be here. So I'm an urban planner. I've worked with this community board. I work with a lot of community boards in New York City. But I've also worked outside of New York City on a lot of comprehensive planning efforts, especially in the Hudson River Valley and in the little cities that line the valley and some of the towns. And, you know, comprehensive planning is something that is fantastic. Everybody should do it. Every community should do it. The fact that New York City doesn't do comprehensive planning is kind of crazy. And it's not only just about land use. It's about bringing the community together about shared goals. I mean, it's been so valuable in many of the communities that I've worked in, and it's also, you know, something you can go back to and reference years down the road in terms of you know, when a site is being evaluated or the community is contemplating changes. And, you know, when I saw Planning Together, I was very hopeful. I was very, very hopeful. When you start reading it, the history and the identification of the problems, I think that it's, you know, it's got a lot of the problems that are identified spot on. And there's a lot of good in the proposal. I have one major issue with it, and it is essentially the role of the mayor's office or the Office of Long-Term Planning in this process. And the idea that the Office of Long-Term Planning is going to develop, you know, do all the community engagement, you know, take all that feedback and develop land use scenarios for the local communities, for each community district, that essentially will be given to community boards and to the borough presidents and to vote on, like to recommend or not. And I think that's a problem. It's a problem, and it's a problem because if you believe in community planning, the fact that they work for the mayor's office and they don't work for the community is a big problem. And I'm just going to use an example here of why that's a big problem. And, you know, I Working Community Board 11, and they did this big engagement process for resiliency in Community Board 11. And they produced this big 288-page plan, which ultimately we had to foil, and 90% of it was redacted. And it was just like, what's going on? Like, why would you do this big planning effort and then hide all of this information from the community which you just engaged? And it's because, you know, it had information in it that they weren't ready to share. And because they didn't work for the community, they worked for the mayor, they were like told that you can't share this information. And you know, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is. It matters who who does the community engagement. It matters the role of the community board. If you believe in community planning, this did not get it right. And there's a lot of good in here. There's an enormous amount of good in here, but there are some fundamental flaws, which I hope could be addressed in an amendment, something that changes this, which is possible.
Thank you, George. We'll go to Chris next.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I think a lot of what George said aligns with where I'm coming from and where ANHD and the Thriving Communities Coalition are coming from. So quickly, I'm the Land Use Policy Coordinator at the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, so ANHD. We're a nonprofit. Our mission is to build community power, to win affordable housing and thriving, equitable neighborhoods for all New Yorkers. And our members are affordable housing nonprofits, neighborhood nonprofits, and equitable economic development nonprofits throughout the city, about 80+ members. And again, we're also a member of the Thriving Communities Coalition. So this is a group of base building groups, of advocacy, policy groups that have really come together out of a belief that the status quo approach to planning and land use is broken, does not work for most New Yorkers. And that without meaningful changes, these processes are just going to further exacerbate inequality, segregation, displacement. And it particularly came out of our rezoning work. So technical assistance and other support provided in rezoning neighborhoods like East New York, like Jerome Avenue in the Bronx, that were pushing back on the de Blasio rezonings. Also neighborhoods like Bushwick or Two Bridges in Manhattan, that were trying to advance their own community plans and were really coming up upon the limitations of those, the way things are currently structured. So again, just sort of stressing, really sort of coming out of, POC neighborhoods, especially that, really we're feeling the status quo does not work. And again, frankly, does not work for, for everybody, for every community. Each community sort of left to engage with what resources they have available and to fight sort of the same fight over and over, one at a time. And again, with sort of no meaningful way to advance their own vision. So that's sort of where we're coming from in thinking, we've long thought and have long seen comprehensive planning as one sort of vital piece of getting at this new approach. I think, as George said, I mean, we see this as hopefully an opportunity to get there. So we see this legislation as a chance to really move us forward. And I think, again, we have to get it right. So as George said, same, we have a lot of concerns around the community planning, especially. I think we need to make sure that is foregrounded and that you're really getting the correct balance of bottom up and top down and always sort of leading with that bottom up. But hopeful that this can really be an opportunity for everybody to engage and get something across that moves the city forward.
Thank you, Chris. And we'll go to Lynn next.
I'm just testing my mic here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
It's great. I have my daughter's performing arts mic. So I wanted to thank everybody on the community board for the work that you do. As to my background on planning issues, I am a Tribeca resident for 27 years and raised my daughter here. I'm also an economist, PhD from UW-Madison. I have an MA in International Economics from Columbia, where I taught economic development adjunct for a few years at the School of International and Public Affairs. And while working as a regional social scientist for the International Development Research Center, I was in charge of urban development grant making for West and North Africa. And I also wrote a training manual on participatory research and planning methodologies. And I trained research teams and trained the trainers, so to speak, throughout West and North Africa at the time. And now I'm working on a book about urbanism in New York City. And I'm behind the creation of several nonprofits, including some foundations in West Africa and Eastern Europe, the Friends of Dwayne Park, which I founded, Tribeca Trust, and more recently, Human Scale NYC. So my thoughts about this planning bill are pretty simple. I'll go quickly because you've probably heard them before. I think number one is that it's being marketed as our planning system is a failure, so we need a new one. And the word comprehensiveness, comprehensive, sounds so sexy. I think this is a clever marketing strategy. The average person is unfamiliar with planning history and probably thinks of planning as a good thing that we need more of. And is probably unaware that, you know, the worst failures in planning history have come from top-down planning. Great 5- and 10-year plans that have crashed inflexibly against the rocks of changing circumstances, changing economies, and changing human migrations that are impossible to predict over a 5- to 10-year period. But the tricky part is that we do need some kind of planning, just not the top-down kind that is proposed in this bill, which empowers a Robert Moses-like figure to set housing production quotas in the historic core of the city, which is already extremely dense and full of historic areas that the developers are keen to get rid of. And rather than engage with the problem of how to spread density out in the city in a fair way, the bill presumes to know the answer: pile the density up into the core before any actual planning or public debate has taken place. In that way, the bill and its top-down quotas look as if they're designed to be an end run around the false boogeyman of NIMBYism, which, as I've argued elsewhere, is simply not the problem that planners like to think it is. Third, the law states that it wants to, and this is, I'm quoting from the law, to prioritize population growth where applicable in areas that have high access to opportunity and low risk for displacement. So let's decode this. Recall that the idea of growth in this administration is building skyscrapers through MIH upzonings. And it's one of the greatest policy failures ever in terms of actually generating significant amounts of affordable housing. High access to opportunity is Vicky Bean's code for Manhattan south of 96, Brownstone, Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn, and the East River waterfront. These are areas where they think that the commute into the city is short, where there's good parks and schools. And low displacement risk is the code word for white neighborhoods. And it seems to suggest that we overdevelop the core and we neglect investment in parks and schools outside the core in low-income neighborhoods. So I have to say that this displacement index issue is very tricky. It's highly contested in the academic world. It's not very scientific. I see that why people want to do it, but it ignores the elephant in the room, which is how to distribute density in the city so that the benefits and burdens are shared fairly. Most of the city's landmass is zoned for single-family homes and is far from public transit. So when are we going to bring transit to those areas and zone them for even a little bit more density? Is that even on the table? In this bill, it looks like that's off the table. So at Human Scale, we've taken the middle ground here, because we've taken the position that we do need better long-term budgeting planning for our physical infrastructure: roads, bridges, tunnels, schools, parks, train stations, sewage systems, mass transit, water supply. But even then, top-down planning is not obviously the best way forward, even on those topics. More democracy and daylight would help. A case in point on that is the new Penn Station thing. Cuomo is acting as a top-down Robert Moses-style planner, allied with Vornado, one of the biggest real estate investment trusts in the country, to get public money to fund eminent domain proceedings to create a Hudson Yards 2.0 that will displace co-ops, demolish condos and small businesses, and create 10 new skyscrapers, but do nothing to fix the underlying problem of Penn Station. Or he doesn't talk about moving Madison Square Garden, no through running train system discussion, nothing. Moreover, Cuomo has done everything possible to make the democratic elements of this planning process moot and irrelevant. Are we going to do that again for the whole city? So we think that this bill should be returned and revised for the next administration under a new conceptual framework. I suggest making it into a bill specifically about long-term budgeting for infrastructure without the focus on housing quotas, which, as I said, is a code for MIH housing. Housing which we think can be solved in other ways besides dirigist Soviet quota setting. And a new conceptual framework should be used for it. You can discard MIH, use legislation to deal with displacement risk, disperse scatter site low-income housing using the public dollar to target the lowest income strata, recognize historic districts as the great asset that they are, that makes our city different from other cities, focus planning on the public realm rather than on deal making for housing with developers. Get the money and fix and build schools, parks, public health facilities, and mass transit. Last, a new framework would focus on small businesses as the engine of economic growth in the city, rather than rely on the production of speculative towers for the presumably built for the biggest companies in the world and the richest people in the world. So I'll put my op-ed that I did in the Village Sun on this into the chat. You can link to that. Thank you.
Wow, great, thank you. Wow.
Thanks so much, everyone. I'm going to kick it off with a couple of questions, and then please, if you're a member of the committee, you want to ask a question, put your hand up. I see we have one member of the public. Elizabeth, we'll get to you in a minute. I have two questions for everybody, which is, if you had to vote on this proposal and you had to vote on it as written, would you vote for it? And the second question is, it sounds like there's a couple of parallels, which is seeing the value in comprehensive long-term planning, and this acknowledgement that if we are going to do it, it really has to be in a bottom-up way that really ensures that kind of a community-driven process. So if you had to make recommendations on how to ensure that it's a community-driven process, a lot of times we see that it's alluded to or it's included as kind of an advisory capacity. And that's something that we struggle with as a community board now. So if you had to recommend a mechanism to ensure that kind of community-driven comprehensive long-term planning, what would it be? And I'll go back to the top. So we'll start with George.
So to answer your first question, no, I wouldn't vote for it the way it is now. I actually think there's a risk of poisoning comprehensive planning for a generation, the way it is written now. And I feel so strongly about that with putting the mayor's office in charge of community planning, just because there's just such a bad track record of it. So it's not that the people aren't smart. Again, they're very capable and very competent. It's just that they don't have any accountability to the people that they're working with. So to answer your second question about what would make it better, I'm going to throw out two ideas. The first one, there is this report done in 2018. Chris was a part of this. I was a part of this. A lot of people were, called The Inclusive City. It was done by, sponsored by the RPA, but a lot of people were a part of it. And in it, they have this concept of the Office of Community Planning, which is independent. And that Office of Community Planning would essentially be like a technical resource team that would provide technical assistance to local communities, which local communities would need, right? And if there's going to be a bottom-up approach, you would need technical assistance to help in that process. And the idea is that this would be independent enough to allow the work to be driven by communities. That's actually a quote from the report, which I think is a good idea. There's a lot of details that would have to be worked out, but something like that would be good. I think another way, which is actually probably my preference, would be to essentially assign more responsibilities to community boards. And that community boards could be kind of like the nexus for developing these plans. Now, I also have no illusions that they would have to be reorganized and re-resourced, right? I mean, the way community boards are now, they couldn't, most of them anyway, could not handle a task like this. But, you know, they could be the center of it. And if given more resources and given technical assistance teams, it could be something that they could facilitate a community-driven plan. Now, some community boards are better at facilitating communities than the community input than others. And I recognize it's an uneven landscape. But, you know, there's an infrastructure there right now, right? We have 59 community districts, 59 community boards. How could they be re-engineered in a way to support this process?
Thanks, George. Chris?
Thanks. Yeah, so to the first, you know, the bill needs to change. So, I mean, I think it needs to be strengthened, but I do think it can be. So I guess that would just be my slight way of threading, you know, of having it both ways. But I think it is, you know, again, I'm hopeful that we could try to get this to where it needs to be. And I think in terms of community planning, yes, I think one, resources is key. So, you know, one idea we have is providing the resources for every community board to, or frankly, mandating every community board has a planner. Am I cutting out? Sorry, I'm hearing some.
I'm going through right now and muting everybody that's not you. Hopefully that'll alleviate.
I'm just making sure. And then I think in terms of the process, it's about, again, foregrounding community planning so that the process really starts with that engagement at the community district level. So you have community boards and community members involved in the target setting from the get-go, in sort of establishing how are we defining these, you know, citywide needs? What is the methodology then for determining how these citywide needs can be, you know, how these citywide needs and how these local needs can be reconciled and met in an equitable fashion? And what is the methodology for that? Have it at each community district level, you know, involvement in setting what those goals are for each community district. I will say to one thing that Lynn said, I mean, the way certainly that we see comprehensive planning, and frankly, even the way that I read this bill, I think this is really about trying to distribute growth throughout all 59 community districts, and then doing it, taking into consideration, you know, I don't really like using the word sort of opportunities, but, you know, for lack of a better one coming to mind, you know, for you know, the sort of facts on the ground in different community districts, the demographics, social, racial, and again, yes, things like commute time, things like schools, parks, open space. You know, I think it's important to stress, you know, again, certainly with how we envision comprehensive planning, and I think what this bill tries to get at as well, it's really about more than just housing and more than just the equitable distribution of housing, but also the equitable distribution of resources. So I certainly agree with Lynn as well on the budget being a central, you know, component of this, and it's something, again, that sort of brought us to the idea of comprehensive planning to begin with. One of the principles of the Thriving Communities Coalition is the equitable distribution of development and of resources. And then, you know, that community participation would continue beyond just the, and engagement would continue beyond just the target setting. Then you would, you know, I think ideally have the community board through an iterative process with the city, creating, you know, being sort of the nexus to create the land use scenario so that it's not something that is being sort of handed down or feeling like it's being handed down by the city. It's something that's being arrived at collaboratively and then put forward for each of the 59 community districts.
Thanks, Chris. And I have to ask, sorry, there's, I'm getting some echo here. If you had to vote for the proposal as it's written today, would you vote for it?
Definitely vote for the analysis. I think that the conditions of the city report, I think everything that sort of lays out, you know, which to me is actually another, you know, extremely necessary sort of thing that's missing in our planning, but something that lays out in sort of one place in one document, a deep dive look at the city as a whole, and then at every community district in terms of sort of some of these demographic and socioeconomic and a whole host of other things. I think then not on the community end. So no, I mean, no, as it stands now, I'm sorry, not to seem like I'm hedging so much. I don't need to be.
I'll allow
Yes.
both.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. And Lynn? One second, Lynn, I'm going to unmute you here. Okay, go ahead.
Is my mic on?
It is now, go ahead.
Okay, great. Absolutely, human scale votes no on this, and we think that it is impossible to negotiate with the current administration and the current set of city council members to develop something that we could go for. That the mindset is too much about, oh, we have to like direct growth. And remember, growth isn't economic growth. Growth to them is growth in skyscraper tall buildings. That's what they think of as growth. And it's not really, that's not how economists see growth. The whole vision of how to do growth here is wrong. We forgot that, growth comes from making stuff, not just building towers. Second is that you have to discuss the distribution of density as a preamble to planning. And there's an upper limit to where density is impossible, and there's a lower limit where you're just in the suburbs and don't have density anymore. So until that's embedded as the key element to discuss, it's pointless. It's like, no. Now, I would say that if in my ideal world, if people are like, well, what is community planning like? And it's, if you can't vote on it, it's not participatory. You have to have ballot boxing. You have to be able to vote on a plan. And now that could come in many ways. It could come in form of referendums. It could come in form of 197A plans that get voted on in the community using cool software that allows anybody with a cell phone registered to that zip code to vote. Or you could reinvent, as George said, reinvent community boards so that they're partially elected or fully elected. I mean, what if you had community boards where 1/3 were elected, 1/3 were appointed, and 1/3 were drawn random from a lottery, like ancient anthems, where you would have to submit to a lottery and do some public service. There's got to be a way to legitimize any plans that come forth. Another point that would have to be is if you decentralize planning in the 197A plan or other way to community boards that are sort of democratically accountable. There's a question of, well, what should they do? How big should their role be? And I would love it if community boards had full power with fines, ability to put fines on people for street tree maintenance, parking, sidewalk stuff, liquor licenses, traffic issues, park maintenance. And, I would love the community board to have the power to issue fines on those guys who've taken over the pops down on Greenwich Street and say, you have to give it back to us, or there's a $1,000 fine a day until you do. So I'm not sure I would decentralize the entire planning process altogether of like, where do we put schools in the city and where should a new park go? There has to be levels of it, but to me, all those levels would be democratically accountable in some way through some type of ballot box or referendum combination. So we have to reinvent a lot to make it work in the city, but democracy is a bitch, but I don't see another way. Anyway, that's what I have to say.
Great synopsis, great ending note. You're all really singing my song in terms of this kind of community-based planning. That's something that we think about all the time, and how to ensure that, and how do we take this opportunity to ensure that when we've been without it for so long. Let's see, I'm going to switch. Elizabeth, thank you for your patience. I'm going to unmute you here so you can ask your question. Elizabeth, are you there? Oh, goodness. Elizabeth, are you on with us?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, so I'm just baselining here. So this is a bill that's up to be passed. It hasn't been passed yet, correct? And then,
Correct.
and then it would be passed by the community boards voting for it, all the community boards in the city?
City council.
City council. Okay, so it would be our city council person that would vote yes or no. Okay, got it.
Okay.
And again, I'm a complete rookie to this, but so if such a group were to be formed for central planning, I mean, what would the cost of that be? How would it be funded? As sort of a taxpayer, you know, trying to keep property taxes down, how do I know what that would cost? It's something sort of like the CBO in the city of New York that says, okay, well, this is how much it's going to cost. And I know there are intangible benefits, so I'm not looking for a cost benefit. I'm just kind of looking like, how much is my property tax going to go up selfishly when this gets passed?
George, I think I see you trying to speak, but you're muted. Let me get your line there. Go ahead, George.
Okay, I'm not an expert in this one, but I will tell you what I've been told is that you can't legislate budgets in these things, right? So you can legislate responsibilities and tasks and what people have to do and what people in government have to do. But as far as money goes, that's a different process. And so the way it is proposed now, there's a lot going on in here. And the idea that you have to develop a generic environmental impact statement for the entire plan, like that in and of itself is a very, very big task, right? I mean, that's enormous. And that's going to cost a boatload of money. There's no doubt about that. And so there's no doubt that that this is going to cost money. But as far as like putting a price tag on it, I don't know that anybody's even tried. I know Department of City Planning in the hearing process said it's going to cost, I don't know, in the many millions of dollars. I don't remember the number that they said, but it was very, very large. In the context of they thought it was a really bad idea.
All right. I mean, but isn't that like kind of a problem? Because how could you pass something when you don't have the slightest idea how much it's going to cost? And again, I don't mean to sound like the cheap Republican on the crowd, though I probably am. But I mean, I took over as treasurer for our building, 65 Nassau, and it's just heartbreaking to see people taking money out of their 401ks and stuff just to pay the maintenance because the taxes have gone up so much since they moved there. I mean, it's really, I think there's a perception that, oh yeah, people in Manhattan are rich, and they're not. They're living hand to mouth. A lot of people that, you might see on the street and think are affluent. So it's an issue, I feel very personally, not for myself, but for, looking at the people that live in our building.
I have a little response to that, if I may.
Sure.
I just want to say that I sympathize completely with that Vicky Bean seems to think that we are a resource that can be infinitely squeezed here in Manhattan, that us affluent Manhattanites. And I would say that people in our building, we're at a limit. I'm paying $28,000 in real estate taxes alone every year for 1,350 square feet of an old building with no anything. Like, we don't have a doorman, we have nothing.
Yeah. Same situation with our building. Absolutely.
It can't keep going up, but they still have all these great plans, like the jail that costs $13 billion, and I think it's up to residents to start making noise, saying, at this point you get affluent displacement, where we all leave, not because we want to, but just because we can't really afford to pay that much money every year in property taxes. And
okay, it's nice to hear. It's nice to hear another voice with the same thing. We've got the same situation. I think I'm paying $24,000 for 900 square feet, and our building is falling apart, and we don't have a doorman. And every time local law 11 comes by, everybody gets hit with another double maintenance. I mean, it just, you're about equitable, and everybody's for affordable housing, but I think people are for affordable housing for themselves. Anyway, that was really my thought. It's just how do we look at the cost so that we know, should we be saying yes to this bill or no to it?
Yeah. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you for joining us and asking your question. Let's see, our chairperson, Tammy Meltzer, has a hand up. Go ahead, Tammy.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really glad, I really appreciate everybody coming. One of the things that I need to remind our community board members is that this is something we need to vote on. Community Board 1 has had a really fantastically stressful year with the most amount of land use issues than we have seen. If you want to start with the jail, Governor's Island, 250 water, 5 World Trade Center coming. We heard a presentation from Pace. We are a district that has a lot going on. We definitely need to opine on this, which is why I'm so delighted everyone's here. You come to your own opinions on how you feel about things, whether or not you think, for example, the mayor has handled the situation with the jails well. How do you feel about your engagement on that aspect? How do you feel the community board was treated and considered, in that aspect? How do you feel that government agencies that have been set up by the mayor's office have worked with the community board? Everyone has to come to their own decisions. When you take a look at that, I look at some of the work that I stepped into with the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Plans. There are lots of questions that I have that seem to be governmentally answered, I think is the right answer. Which, when you get to a T section and you say, gee, am I supposed to go left or right? And the person says, read the street sign, that doesn't necessarily help. Or I've sent everybody to the right. That doesn't actually tell me the directions that I needed or give me enough information. We have had an interesting time. I think if we had a different mayor, if times were different, that could be different. But we don't, and the mayor changes every couple of years, and we have to think about what that will be. So whether you believe top-down or bottom-up planning is important, this is something that CB1 absolutely needs to vote on. So I ask you to ask Lynn and George and Chris as many questions as you think you can to get to a point that you feel comfortable saying for yourselves, gee, I support this or I don't. And understand that electeds come, electeds go. And for every advisory board that I know numerous people on this board sit on other advisory boards or other not-for-profits or whatever you sit on, think about how you feel your engagement is for that and how the constituencies for those organizations feel. And I'm off my box.
Thanks, Tammy. Would you like to ask the panel any specific questions?
I would really like the board members to ask. We have such a compelling group of board members. I think after hearing my testimony for the last 8 months, people pretty much know where I sit on this. And so I might, in its current iteration, I would not support it. It needs change in order to work. But I come from a community board perspective in my answer to that.
Great, thank you, Tammy. Let's see, I'm gonna go, Mark Donfeld put a hand up. Mark, are you on?
I'm on.
Go ahead, Mark.
Hi, thank you for giving me this time. Thank you, Tammy. That was very eloquent. Appreciate it. And Lynn as well. Thank you. I have a couple of questions. First question is, perhaps this is towards community board members. Do you think it's time that the community boards communicate with each other to set up some sort of new way of letting the mayor and the folks that are generating these bills know how we really feel? I mean, are we actually being heard? I remember I'm an old former community board person. I remember that years ago, I felt like I was being heard, and I think that in the present, it doesn't seem that way. It seems like we are being shoveled aside. And I think that perhaps if there is a way to have some communication amongst the boards so they could present a more united front to question some of these bills and policies, that perhaps we might get some change. So,
Mark, I would jump in there for a quick second, and I couldn't agree with you more with the notion of feeling shuffled aside by the last several years of this administration when it comes to community board engagement. On large programs like this, just giving you one example, the MIH CQA legislation of a few years ago, we do coordinate with the other community boards, even at this committee level. But I would also point out too that the borough president holds a borough, Tammy, correct me if it's borough board, excuse me.
I can help you with that. There is a borough
so
board meeting every month, and each community board talks about what they're voting on and what's going on in their district. There is symmetry between the boards. We've actually started as community board chairs in the last 3 months putting together forums on housing, gentrification, the effects of small business throughout all the Manhattan community boards, because we find that there's more that unites us, but from different aspects. You could say that Community Board 1 is a prime example of what has happened post gentrification for the most part, and there are other areas in the city that are just being gentrified. So we are having those dialogues back and forth, which is one of the things that makes many of the boards have already opined. I cannot think of one, unless George or Chris can, that has said, oh yeah, we think this is a great idea. We'd like it just the way it is. I'd let George or Chris say if they heard.
Not that I'm aware.
No.
And the follow-up here is George, since we have a relationship from the past, is there some sort of group that can be formed to come up with some sort of contextual document that can be used by each and every community board to help assess the needs of those individual boards? Something that would sort of create a language and information that could be then generated and really inform the mayor and the governing bodies of this city.
Well, I mean, the one thing that comes to mind is, as I said, there are some good things in this report or this proposal. And one of the things is the conditions of the city report, which is this idea that that there would be a uniform conditions of the city report, which would not only look at the needs of the city, but the needs of each community district, and in a common language in terms of affordability, school seats, infrastructure repair, things like, things, the physical needs of those community districts comprehensively. And I think, that would be a great starting point for, assessing the needs and allowing communities to advocate for themselves. Like, what does the community needs in terms of sewerage capacity? We don't know this. This is not the kind of thing that really gets talked about. But hey, well, what if we, evaluated it commonly for each community district, and in New York City, the squeaky wheel gets the grease in many ways, and allow for community districts and individuals and institutions to advocate for these things.
But we don't have a mechanism to do it. So what we need to do is to create some sort of mechanism.
The mechanism that comes to my mind is the community boards as an existing mechanism, but there could be, boroughs or some other organization that helps press for these sort of citywide planning issues, for sure.
I could jump in there. I have a couple of comments on those things. I did help set up the Citywide Land Use Alliance or Coalition, Citywide Coalition on Land Use, I think they call themselves. They meet every week. It's community groups who are arguing about land use rezonings of various kinds, spot rezonings. They all have different issues, but it's more for the activists who share resources and strategies about how they plan to fight whatever it is they're going to fight. But I wanted to point out that this proposal at hand, this particular planning bill, regardless of the wonderful information that it suggests be collected, which I'm a researcher, more information is always better, always good to collect more. Kind of surprised they don't already collect that kind of stuff, but you know, let them do that. But this is a very mayor-heavy process that they're talking about, and it gives more power to a mayor who's already the king of our city. You know, the city charter doesn't give enough power, I think, to the city council. It's all in the mayor. He controls this Robert Moses figure, and yes, he's required to do consults, but you guys know where that leads. You've been consulted on lots of stuff. You've given your opinion, and it doesn't really matter. And I have some data to back up your feeling that no one is listening to you. Last December, prior to COVID, I took every single land use planning action, every ULURP action since de Blasio became mayor. And I looked at when did it go through, what got passed, was it modified? 90% went through without any modifications at the city council. Of the ones that got modified, none really got rejected. And there was no, they just got slight modifications at the city council. One or two got sent back, but then resurfaced in different form. And it became very clear there was no correlation between what the community board said and whether or not it went through. There was no correlation between the city council members. People are always like, oh, city council deference is a big problem. I'm like, well, they're passing everything no matter what happens. Now, yes, there may have been things that never went through ULURP, but I think that's an indicator that nobody's listening and something needs to change.
I would maybe just chime in and add, because I have a slightly different perspective in terms of, you know, to me, I think I see the analysis, you know, and then the goals when those are set sort of through a true, you know, community engagement public process. To me, that is increased transparency, and then not creating a new Robert Moses figure, but instead it is now upfront, sort of with community engagement and involvement from the get-go, and saying these are the city's goals, and this is why the city has these goals, and then the community responds to one, again, is sort of part of that aspect of that creation, but then responds to here is how we think these goals can best be met in our neighborhood, in our community district. Whereas, you know, I guess I would essentially say today, the city does have its goals, but it is completely untransparent. And it is brought to you and brought to everybody when ULURP starts, or, you know, when an application is certified. And there's nothing like that to look to and to say, okay, how does this compare to the framework that we put forward and put the work in together, you know, collectively to help create. And so, you know, to me, I see this as really increasing transparency. And again, I'm really not sort of defending the bill as written, but the idea of comprehensive planning, and again, what I hope that we could get it to is something that increases that transparency. And then, you know, understanding as well, at least with this bill, ULURP is still in existence. So there's nothing that is then a given because it was in the comprehensive plan. That is like the framework, the guideline for essentially advocacy for the community moving forward and saying, does this align with what was put forward or does it not? But all the decision makers and their roles are still in place.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to the other panelists. I'm very pleased to see our phone lines lighting up here with some committee members. I'm going to move to Michael Kramer. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I'm not a very big fan of ULURP. How it's been co-opted, how it's so controlling, how it's become so transactional. And I was wondering whether it could be improved and whether there's any hope for this bill to be improved by improving ULURP.
Do you want me to start with that?
Sure, George.
Okay, all right. So ULURP doesn't change at all in this bill, right? And I think it would take, and somebody here can correct me if I'm wrong, it would take a charter revision to do that. Ultimately, it's not a part of this, and so this is kind of laid on top of the existing system. And I think you're right, is that our existing system, our existing ULURP system, could definitely be improved. There's no doubt that it could be improved. It just, it brings predictability to applicants, but not necessarily to the people where the projects are being proposed. And that's a problem, but this doesn't go there, right? It's not ambitious like that. And I think there's a place to be ambitious, and I think there may be a place to reopen a charter revision commission at some point to address these issues. And I know that was on the table, or at least people were at least discussing it a couple of years ago when the last charter revision commission was open, but it never really went anywhere, which is too bad, because there definitely needs to be improvements made in our land use process.
We testified before that commission. I think you did too, I think, George.
I might have.
You might have. So we testified saying that one way to improve the ULURP process would be that the minute city planning has the slightest idea that they're going to even think about doing some kind of zoning change in an area, that they have to issue a piece of paper that says, we're thinking about doing something in this area, and they have to have a map that shows where they're going to mess with, why they want to mess with it, and then it has to go to everybody, and it has to happen at least a year before anything is certified. And it triggers a process of a speculative land use transactional tax that in the proposed area for rezoning, any property that gets traded is subject to this land use tax, because what happened in East New York when they rezoned is you had massive speculation going on for like 2 years prior. Now, this doesn't really take, supposedly this addresses the problem, is that developers and their lawyers go to city planning, they talk for years about what to do, and they have full access to city planning. They talk to them. If you go stand in front of the Equitable building and watch who's going in and out, you will see. Now, we don't have the same access. Like, city planning doesn't talk to me. Nobody ever asked me about the rezoning of Hudson Street, and nobody ever consulted me once, but they consulted Trinity Real Estate big time. In fact, Trinity Real Estate asked for it. And I'm thinking, well, that process needs to change as to who city planning can talk to, when, how they're open to the public for similar conversations. I've called them up and asked for meetings and basically been told to go away. I was invited to one air rights transfer meeting, one. And I guess everything I said was too wild for them, and they just never invited me back. But, there is a problem with who city planning talks to in the year or 2 years before they certify ULURP. That could be rendered open and public in some way. And that won't fix it all, but it might take care of a little bit of the backroom dealing that goes on.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And, I think certainly, we see comprehensive planning as just sort of one aspect of what needs to be, many more land use reforms. And that's at the Thriving Communities Coalition, we have a platform that includes, other ideas on community planning. I mean, including, and same. I mean, I was part of the Two Bridges groups that are trying to advance a community rezoning there, that work is still ongoing. But DCP was just wholly unprepared to even engage with with these groups. I mean, they're like, where are your consultants? Where are your, why are you, why are you? So, I essentially, I think that comprehensive planning, again, is like an extension of the public engagement part of ULURP. So it is, again, getting the framing and the priorities out front, and then hopefully a way to advance community plans that align with those goals that have been set. So, again, I think that's how comprehensive planning fits in. And then I think agree with George and Lynn, there's a trove of other ways, including getting community plans as alternatives to it in an EIS, like as part of a ULURP application. Get those in there so that there's a way to move those forward. Basically it forces the city or developers to come to the table more knowing that this alternative can be voted on, or as a way to frankly get this alternative across. Anyway, a lot of other ideas, but yeah.
So that makes me think of another thing that, there's a lot of fear out there of displacement, and it's in all 5 boroughs. So, here in Tribeca, we're being displaced by property taxes, but in other places, they're being displaced by high rents and, excessively high housing prices from the luxury market. And I think that prior to planning, if we as a city solved that fear of displacement with legislation, we would have these debates over what kind of development to have. They would be less anxiety ridden and less full of anger and fear, because people feel, well, I'm not going to be kicked out by the process. And so we need things like the Good Cause Eviction Act in Albany to be there with a low inflation cap on that. It should apply to commercial rents as well, commercial rent control. We need universal rent stabilization. Imagine if we had those 2 things, people would feel they're not being kicked out. And so they're more open to whatever happens. Right now, I feel like people really are fearful.
Thanks, everyone. Let's see, Joe Lerner.
First, a simple question. When is this vote coming up? Do we know?
I personally don't know. I know we have Anthony Drummond. Anthony, I'm going to unmute you for a moment. Anthony's land use for our city council member's office to see if he has the up-to-date information for us that he can share on the status of the legislation itself.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. And again, thanks to the panelists. It's been a very interesting, engaging discussion.
It's my question.
In regards to the proposed legislation, it is estimated, though not affirmed, that this is going to be voted on by the council after the city council has taken action on the budget. Because this proposed legislation that's related to comprehensive planning has a budgetary component to it, they are tying that in with the budget as well. So there's still plenty of time for a lot of the community groups and community members to opine on. But right now, from our end on the council, we're looking at it more than likely after the budget is done. That's our estimate there.
So, if I may follow up with that, Annie has said that community boards should give specific comments. So when do you want those comments by to make it meaningful for the vote?
Can I continue where I left off? Hello?
So if you don't mind, I would like Anthony to answer that question, because that informs how soon we should be doing a resolution, and then we'll pass it back to you, Joe.
Thanks.
Anthony, did you catch that question? That was when community boards should be making sure that their comments are on to make sure that they're really considered and meaningful as part of this process.
I would actually say and recommend, honestly, sooner the better, for the community boards and respective committees within the community boards to put their resolutions forward, because I know as time goes and you have the information, other things will come up. It definitely, as soon as you can, because therefore that would definitely be considered, and that will also have, at least for us earlier, to include as part of when we start analyzing and deliberating on this legislation, to have that ready to go. So
I think if I can just jump in on that, I think it would be fair for us to slate something in May for a resolution to give folks time to digest what they've heard tonight, to go back to do any additional research they want to do. And we can come to a landing next month. That would give us time to pass it with the full board before the end of May, which, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be well in time before the budget should be passed, right?
That's correct, Patrick. Correct.
Am I on now?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe. Thank you, Anthony.
Here's my thought. There is a borough board meeting coming up later this month. I think we should our chairperson should bring this up at the borough board so that we go to the council members, not the mayor, not anyone else. We know the mayor doesn't care about anything but himself and his quote unquote legacy. I think we should, sorry about the phone. I just think we should go and start something with the council members and put them on the record if we can, and move that way. That's the path I see to be possibly be successful. Thank you.
Joe, let me answer that for you, being the chair. We can bring it to borough board. It needs to have a vote by resolution through the full board before we bring it to borough board. So the reason why I'm nudging a little bit here is because we discussed it briefly last month. We have the speakers this month. Other boards have started a little earlier than we have, potentially because we've had a bucket of land use things that have kept us rather occupied. But in order for me to discuss it at borough board, which is where the community boards do it, and then that pushes back to the city council, we need to do a resolution in committee and then vote at the full board. That's the process. Whatever I say has no meaning because the board has not voted until you vote.
Okay, but I think the answer lies with the city council. And I think we should go full blast and get these guys and women on the record. That's all.
And through a very nice chairperson's letter, Stevie One is on record, at least as of the first hearing, with stating some concerns, big high-level concerns.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the council people.
That was directed to the council, the chairperson's letter. I'm just pointing that out.
My thought is all the boards that look at this position the way we do, not just our board, all the boards in the whole city should be informed, if they're not, and attack it through the city council people.
Gotcha, understood.
An election's coming up. They're gonna count everything. And if they get letters, they're gonna count those letters because not many people write letters to their council.
Joe, I would tell you that I think since I've taken over, people are a little tired of hearing from me. We write letters a lot, but that's okay. That's what I'm here for.
But you don't have any other solution, or I haven't heard one. I like to move forward, not just talk, but move forward. Find any path to get something done. So far, I have not heard a path to get something done. And number two, I think this is the simplest path to get it done.
Can I just ask Patrick, maybe it does seem like this will be maybe it's time to jump in with some sort of major points on the resolution, which I think have all been sort of enumerated quite well here. Thanks, Lynn and George and Chris. So that was terrific. And maybe I think as we have this recorded, we could maybe, identify the key points and then maybe come back with the resolution, sort of a draft of the key points or something, because I think it's difficult for folks to really understand the breadth of this is immense. And I don't know that everyone's read every testimony from, the different groups that are involved on the comprehensive plan. So I just wonder how, we really kind of want to move forward with it. I agree with everybody, including Joe here, absolutely. But we kind of have to have a way to do this. So I'm wondering if that's a way to do it, Diana and Patrick.
I think, Alice, we do have a sense of some of those bigger points. And I think Tammy's chairperson's letter is a great starting point. I would like for one to be able to take the time to digest what we've heard tonight and go back through the actual legislation itself. And even if possible, I recall Gail Brewer giving some nice testimony on it as well, and her concerns, and sort of synthesize that all together and outline a resolution that we can start to work on at the next meeting.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't clear on that. Yeah, I just mean to have it sort of ready to go at the next meeting with all of those aspects of it brought together. Yeah,
agreed. Gotcha. Thank you.
Just to jump in for a second, I can circulate, Vicki, I know you've had your hand up, you've been so patient, you're right after me. I was just going to offer, I'll recirculate the materials that we have on this, the presentation, the video from the presentation, and I'm happy to kind of outline the major concerns that have been raised so far. So we have a kind of a springboard. So keep an eye out on your email. I'm sure you have no shortage of emails from the community board, but I'll get that out this week. Vicki, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I want to start by saying what an awesome panel. Chris, great to meet you. George, you really have become an invaluable person to this board, so I want to say thank you. And Lynn, wow, I need to talk to you. We need to have drinks. I really appreciated your presentation. So I wanted to bring up an issue, and I don't know how to start this other than to just put one personal line in here, which is that, I was born in Europe, and my parents moved to Canada like 45 years ago, but now I've spent like some 30 years in the States. And what happens as an immigrant is, anyway, to me, is that you evaluate the country you want to join, right? That's how one decides they want to leave their country and go to another country. And it seems to me, not as a fatalistic, what is it? I'm sorry, I had the second shot and I think my brain is absolutely freezing, but I'm trying to make this point. Not as a decision that can be changed, but it seems to me that it is the US's manifesto that focuses on economic development and help to the few groups that Lynn mentioned, like Vornado and related examples. And I really appreciated your Morse coding, what it means to be mobile and upward mobile and move people and displace people, because it really talks about, for me, about us focusing on commercial and financial success and the corporate world success. And so when I see it in that view, for me, it's really hard to understand how we can, once this is politicized, how we can change the system. Is it even possible to change the system where we focus on the well-being, the quality of life, the happiness and everything about the population, because we're not being considered as a primary group of interest. And so, for example, Lynn, maybe you can help me understand. I work for these large developers. I built for them. I don't agree with some of the stuff that we do. I think that Related's project in Hudson Yards, for example, we were told by a state senator that, do you know, there's not one firehouse or one ambulance station, no other infrastructure than that subway line that we as public people paid for. And yet all of this was permitted. And so now there's this entire community that's missing all the infrastructure. It's like the developers suck the life out of the public infrastructure, but we never give anything back. But, you know, we're not here to give anything back to us. So how do we change that? Because that's where I think the crux of the problem is. You know, the various tools like ULERP or lawyers having, availability to the entire process for a year before any of us, that's all geared to helping that one small group up top. So can we actually change the American Manifesto and start taking care of ourselves?
Well, I have to go in a couple of minutes, so I'm going to give a couple closing remarks and say thank you for having me. And I think I will respond to that in that, you know, the arc of history does not bend towards justice unless we pull really hard on it.
Yeah.
And that requires many years. And we seem to have lost a lot of experience of direct democracy in New York City. I think other cities are experimenting with it more. And I think we need to reincorporate some elements of those. Gone too much to representative democracy with the mayor and the city council having all the power. So power needs to be redistributed a little bit. And that's going to take a long time. For this particular bill, I urge people to vote no. I'm an activist on this. Our group has written the city council. We've written every single city council member to explain why we think they should vote no on this bill, why we think comprehensive planning could still be cool, but just in a different way, in a different administration. And for those on the community board, you should look to my, I wrote kind of an op-ed in the Village Sun, and you can read it there. It's a shorter version of my remarks. But thank
Lynn,
you all.
the link is in the chat, Lynn. So thank you very much for coming.
Okay. Thank you very much, but I gotta go.
Thank you, Lynn.
And thank you all for everything you do. I know it takes hours and hours for what you're doing. Bye.
Well, with that, I do think that's a good cue for us to wrap up. And Diana, if you have some closing thoughts as well as our two remaining panelists, we'd love to hear them. But for my part, I'll just say that I think we'll be taking this back up again next month with the idea that we will do a resolution and try to close out the topic for us, continuing to monitor, of course, after that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like I said, I'll redistribute these resources. I think this has really helped us kind of push through the barrier of kind of how far we'd gotten in the conversation amongst ourselves. It's thank you so much to all of the guests, and I'll reach out to Lynn too if she's already left us, because this kind of expertise is so enormously helpful for people who are familiar with the community board's position and what we need in terms of community advocates to be able to do comprehensive long-term planning successfully. So thank you for that. Like I said, you'll see an email from me with more resources. I'll start outlining the major concerns. So I think we'll be in a good place next month, but I know Chris especially, I'm sure George is running out of time as well. So I want to pass it to them and see if they have any concluding remarks.
Sure. I will say that New York City isn't special, meaning like we treat ourselves like we're special, right? We do, and we have a crazy land use process that is like no other place in America anyway. And I think that's to our detriment. And I think if we really believe in comprehensive planning and we really build on what Lynn was saying, democratization of our community, of our land use process, then we really got to start thinking a little bigger in terms of reorganization, re-engineering, and the solutions that are put on the table. I do like pieces of this. I do like big pieces of this, but there are flaws in it, and it's also not a very big step. So I thank you for paying attention to this, because people need to hear the voices of the communities, and the community boards are the right places to hear it from. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you for caring about this, and thank you for
Great, thanks, George. Sorry you were cutting out at the end. I wasn't sure if you were done. Yeah, thank you all. This has been a great conversation. And yeah, I agree. I'm just, George, what you're saying makes me think, I find it always funny that the city will say we're too big for comprehensive planning, which to me is exactly what you should, like a big complex city is why you should do planning. Like these are the issues that you need to, and the type of place that needs to be doing planning. And yeah, I think I think what you heard tonight, I mean, certainly the understanding that, the essential need for community planning to be a key aspect of comprehensive planning. And I guess I would just, urge you all to really consider the importance of the need for change to the way we do planning, of comprehensive planning, if done right, as a way to get there, and to, and to at least pass on all the ways you think that it can be made right, to this council and then for future, for posterity.
Great. Thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate the conversation. Diana, unless you can think of anything else, I think we are at the end of our meeting.
That's it for me.
Great. Thanks to everybody for coming. We'll see you back next month. Have a good night.
Thanks, Patrick. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Diana.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, everyone.